Arny Nadler is an associate professor in the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. He earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts in Sculpture from WashU and his Master of Fine Arts in Sculpture from Cranbrook Academy of Art. He is a recipient of numerous grants and fellowships. Nadler's work explores the predicament of the human form, its fragility and dominance in the environment. Exploiting the natural plasticity of ceramics, his sculpture situates the body in a state of ambiguous metamorphosis. Irregular outgrowths in the material signal erratic germination or atrophy. By working against symmetry, he challenges the expectations of wholeness for the body. Their stilled and puzzled nature is a grasping for truth or a viable belief system. Welcome, Arny.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to exhibit. And thanks to everyone who helped me out with making arrangements. I had help from Donna Pooley to get stuff coordinated. And also I had two great studio installation assistants, Skylar and I think Tyler. Helped me out installing the show. That was great help. So what I thought I would do is, because this is an academic environment, I thought I would go through several bodies of work that led up to the work that you see today. So I'll kind of cover those briefly and then talk about the current work and then leave some time at the end for any questions that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and let's share this. Okay. So some of the work I'm going to be showing you is nearly 30 years old. Some of these images are so old they were taken on slides and digitized, and that's why they maybe look a little blurry. I've always been really, really fascinated with form, with gesture, and this is from a body of work that I started in the back when I was in graduate school and kind of worked on for about 10 years, a series of fictional rehabilitative equipment. These pieces were based on some personal narrative. I grew up with a father who was a paraplegic, and his presence and disability played an incredible role in like my early formative years. And so I found the idea of these kind of prosthetics really, really fascinating as tools. Most of us think of tools with regard to their function. But when you think about some crutches, walkers, things like that, we tend to think about the user's dysfunction. So I made a series of pieces that became that kind of pointed towards this kind of equipment, but at the same time became both dysfunctional and graceful and almost beautiful. These prosthetics kind of led to a series of flying machines or hybridized flying machines where I would make these pieces, and these prosthetics were made to the human scale. I was really interested in people seeing them unoccupied and being able to project themselves into the pieces. So this is made out of bent steel, welded steel, and the wings are made with sewn and stitched together window screening that is coated very laboriously with layers and layers of polyurethane that would soak through and kind of fill the holes in the window screening to create this thin, transparent wing-like membrane. I've always worked in an iterative fashion, which you can see in the work in the gallery. But throughout my career, I tend to kind of zero in on a direction in my work, and then I need to see it from several different perspectives, possibilities, scales, materials. So I tend to work iteratively, and that also gives me the kind of the opportunity to try things without having to put so much pressure on an individual piece. And that's been kind of a current theme through all my work. Some of the pieces led to installations that had kind of a forensic quality, almost like these rehabilitative equipment or flying machines found in some type of crash site. So these pieces, it's also important to say that these pieces are made in a really kind of improvisational way, which is a way of working that I have embraced. At times I've moved away from, which I'll show you, and then have returned to today. So when I would make these pieces, I didn't really have any plan of what they were going to be. I was more interested in how they might behave and how they might act in space, the kind of gestures that they might have. And I would begin working with them, and kind of like a wrestling match would ensue until I reached something that I thought was finished. So I worked on those pieces for about 10 or 12 years, and got to the point where I felt a little that my work was getting a little predictable in the studio. And quite frankly, I was getting kind of bored. So I decided to do some shifts in the work, still interested in utility, but I shifted my work towards some larger scale outdoor pieces. Pieces that I think of as having kind of the quality of like an architecture for an individual person or maybe two people. So this is a piece called Wintering. It's made out of fabricated steel. Each of these forms is about 10 feet tall and built from about 8 pieces that are bolted together on site. So kind of a follow through with the earlier work is an interest in pieces that were evocative, that had a sense of utility and function, but without having but kind of disturbing that idea of function and utility and not having a really clear idea about what the purpose of these things are, and what the nature of them are. So I spent several years building some pieces that had those kinds of qualities. This is a piece called Caveat, which stands about 14 feet tall. And this form is based on the Jersey barrier, which is a concrete barrier that you might find, or that you would find, as kind of a median in the highway systems. And I was interested in this kind of ubiquitous form, but exploding the scale, changing the materials, so that one might look at this and kind of feel somewhat familiar with the form. It might remind them of things, but kind of an inability to exactly place where and what it is. I really enjoyed the problem solving requirements of working at this scale. Uh, th- this piece is made out of 100 parts that could all be loaded into like a 16-foot Penske truck and assembled on site. And pieces like this over here, I installed probably 7 to 8 times, everywhere from West Nyack, New York to Key West, Florida. And I really enjoy the problem solving required with that kind of experience. It did start to become a bit tedious with regard to the fabrication. And one of the things that became challenging with this kind of work, from kind of a growth potential as an artist, is it was a piece like this would take about a year to build. And it became kind of challenging to really take a lot of risks in the work. And given the scale of it, given how much time it would take to make. So I wanted to maybe start to kind of point more towards some other kind of ways I had been working in a more improvisational manner. And that led to a couple of kind of great opportunities I had to build some sculptures on site. And so this piece here is called Grosse Point Confluence, and it was installed at the Evanston Art Center. Evanston is the first suburb just north of Chicago, where Northwestern University is. And this piece was made over the course of about a week with like three assistants and using about, I'm thinking, about 7,000 feet of rebar. Rebar is that ribbed steel that you see in concrete construction. Again, pointing towards this omnipresent material. So this piece was made in what was exciting about this was I kind of had a really, really simple drawing kind of plan for it, but I could make it in a really improvisational manner, thinking about it more as like a drawing in space. So over the course of the week, I began to stake these pieces in the ground and then move the rebar through space, tying it together with cable ties, and then eventually welding it all together. So this was an exciting kind of way to experiment with line and with sight and being kind of more responsive to not just a sight, but more responsive to a form right in front of you. Uh, some of the other larger outdoor pieces, I felt a little bit like a factory worker. I would go into the studio and have to cut 1,000 or so pieces, and this allowed me to work in a much more gestural and free-flowing way. And I had another opportunity. This piece here is called Whelm, and it was installed at the University of Missouri, the UMSL campus, University of Missouri St. Louis, with a lot more steel actually, much kind of denser. This has over 2 miles of steel in it, and this piece was up for about 8 years. And then I removed it it was kind of really embedded into the ground. When this piece was installed, St. Louis was experiencing a drought and it was incredibly hot. So we had to constantly have a hose available because we were setting the grass on fire constantly while we were welding it. Grass was much yellower than it is here in this image. But again, this kind of created or kind of created the seed within me to feel much more confident about moving forward, making pieces without having an exact end in mind. And that's something that I've embraced with my more recent work and has become a really kind of exciting aspect to my work. So you can see here some forms that are starting to point a little bit more into the direction of the work that is in the gallery right now, pointing more towards the idea of the figure or at least the body having kind of bodily qualities. This is a piece that's about 5 feet tall and made out of cast concrete and some metal rebar structures inside. So I built this piece by probably casting concrete over the course of maybe 12 to 14 intervals. Beginning at the bottom, of course, creating some type of mold out of cardboard and plastic, kind of wrapped plastic, and just begin to kind of add on to the form in slow increments. And I was really interested in a couple things. Number one, the way this form really responded, the way I was responding to it as a figure, the way it was built up slowly and how I started to experiment with bulges, things that were evocative of the body, the nuanced quality of the material, the way the plastic would wrap around and get kind of captured in the cast concrete. So this was kind of an important bridge piece that led me to working more in ceramics. So I've got a series of pieces here that from a series called Gilt, Gilt, and I started working on these pieces over a sabbatical that I had, and I these are working kind of in the tradition of kind of biomorphic abstraction. So when I started making these pieces, I was never trained in ceramics. I think I took one semester of ceramics when I was in college, but I'm trained as a sculptor. So the clay became this really I was so familiar with working with steel and had a lot of confidence working with steel at scale. And this material, what was great about it is it made me really feel like a beginner. And I had an incredible amount of failure with these pieces. And I think it's really important as artists to put ourselves in situations where we're beginners, where we are approaching something, whether it's a material or a concept, as this kind of like prime investigator. Like, what is this? How does it behave? I'm going to research how others have done it, but I'm going to kind of screw up a lot on my own. And many of these pieces I would build too fast, too heavy, too wet, and I would get all excited about working in the studio only to come back the next day and find it on the floor. So that was a real kind of humbling but important experience. So I started to build a series of these pieces that I don't really think of them as being figurative. I think of them as being, um, again, biomorphic, kind of pointing towards anatomy. We can see the kind of the bulges that are evocative of a body, seams, things like that. And so this was an exciting way for me to start to experiment with this kind of material that I had only worked with very, very briefly as a young beginning artist and seeing what it could do. All these pieces here are painted, and all my ceramic sculpture is painted. And that I do that for a few reasons. Number one, what I find exciting about painting, and I of course I didn't invent painting sculpture. People painting ceramics, people have been doing it forever. What I find interesting about it is that color is such an immediate and fascinating way to alter something. And I could paint something, I could paint a sculpture, not be too kind of concerned about what it would look like because if I really, really hated it, I could just paint over it, which I did many times. So these have these kind of metallic surfaces that I would combine with greens and blues and grays and other kinds of colors to give them this kind of shiny, otherworldly quality, which I found to be kind of interesting. And just to give you a sense of scale, these guys here are kind of range between, I would say, like 12 to 25 inches tall. So this was a great way for me to, what I found really exciting about this is also the scale that I was working at, having worked for so long with these large, either large kind of monumental outdoor pieces or even pieces that were large enough to reference equipment that I could project my body into. These were small pieces and they just allowed for me to again work in a very kind of iterative manner to work quickly, and to, quite frankly, not really care that much about each of them. And I found that when I could get into that mind space of being kind of really interested in what they were doing, but not so concerned about them because they weren't these kind of huge year-long investments, I found that I was able to make mistakes and to push them when I thought they were failing. So here are just a few more of these pieces. And so now this is kind of like I think a bridge piece between those gilt pieces and the work that I have now in the gallery, which is a series that I have, which I've called Firstlings. And the idea of a firstling comes from thinking about these forms as being kind of figurative in a primordial way. What would it look like if our world or some type of world were kind of beginning again? So I began to work on these forms, thinking about human, animal, plant, and other worldly kind of possibilities for the body. Uh, Again, this piece over here is kind of a big-ish piece. It's maybe like 40 inches tall. Uh, and for those of you again who maybe have worked with ceramics, the way I would begin working on this piece is I really would have no idea what the outcome would be. I would begin to just kind of like at the bottom, play with the form, and I've always been really kind of fascinated with form, with working in the round, and just kind of begin to develop these pieces and have them kind of evolve and transmute in front of me. For many of these pieces and the ones that you see in the gallery, I've kept my color palette really simple, and with an effort to really have the focus be on the form and a little bit less on the kind of the cultural implications of color. Most of these pieces have a real kind of matte quality. I was thinking about I wanted them to have the kind of the quality of like a chunk of charcoal that if you were to kind of crack it open, you might you kind of see how it was like the same throughout. So I wanted it to have that kind of dense quality about it. So I like playing with gesture, with positioning on the ground plane. I like it when I think the best sculptures I make are ones that look like they might be teetering on the edge of falling over or moving, which I think gives it an interesting kind of dynamic quality. So all these pieces have this kind of they're kind of firstling one, firstling two, as a way to again kind of work in this iterative manner and think of them just as a series. So as we see over here, I start to kind of push away. Like if I were to kind of go back to these over here, they seem to have a real kind of body mass, kind of mono kind of quality to them. And I'm start to working here, moving beyond that to have like strange appendages, movements in space, things that kind of are evocative of fingers or toes or horns or ears, but don't really appear to have any specific function. And I think this kind of relates back to this idea of this kind of transmuting form that is evolving in space, which I find to be really kind of fascinating. And you know, I think it relates to again some of the personal history that I have. But I like to think of it relating also a bit to uh, our present moment. I think that many kind of people feel today that we are in kind of a strange space where things are changing, sometimes rapidly. And I think of these forms kind of having us kind of consider a bit this the kind of the unknown of kind of current transformations. So that's something I'm really interested in. Many of the pieces start to have I'll make the forms and then I'll take thin pieces of clay and kind of wrap the forms that they have kind of a bandaged quality, as if there are wounds, something being healed, something being concealed. Some of them have these kind of like bases that I think are more reminiscent of kind of classical sculpture that we might think about, or kind of sculpture with a capital S, which I think is an interesting relationship. But I do tend to kind of gravitate more towards pieces that actually don't have that, and that kind of really kind of feel like they're becoming a little bit uh, less stable and more dynamic in space. This is a piece I currently have in the show, and I think one of them that tends to that I think about as far as referring more to kind of unknown creatures or animals, and again has some of that kind of wrapping and bandaging going on. So here are some images from an installation I had at Bruno David Gallery in St. Louis. It's a gallery where I have representation. And it starts to create kind of an interesting relationship between the sculptures and these drawings that I make. And I'd love to talk a little bit about the drawings. So my entry point into art making, as I think for many people, was drawing when I was a very young boy. And but as I became a sculptor, I kind of put drawing and working on paper away, and I always kind of had an interest in it, but I never quite knew how to work on drawings that had an interesting kind of relationship with the sculpture. And so these pieces actually became uh, I thought about them less as drawings and much more as warm-up exercises, as ways for me to kind of get going in the studio and to work on form and gesture and possibility without the kind of the burden that working in clay can have. Requires clay is kind of heavy. You have to be it requires a lot of care and feeding. You have to kind of be careful with how you're building it, how quickly you're building it. It wants to fall apart, and which is exciting, but is a burden. And so these drawings were kind of a way for me to experiment with form and gesture, not as blueprints for drawings, but just to kind of like throw out some possibilities in a very low stakes situation. And so now I have I try to make a drawing, an ink wash drawing, every time I go to the studio. So I've got tons of them as a way to kind of connect me to the work and as a transition to working in the studio. Uh, and most of them don't take any more than about, at most, 15 minutes. So here are a few more kind of examples of the sculptures where you can see playing with kind of scale, playing with multiple appendages and really kind of playing up with texture. I'm interested in these things kind of feeling like they are of the earth and kind of emerging from the earth. And that's something where that I start to think about and I think begin to incorporate into some of the later pieces. Here's some more examples of kind of separations from the base, some of the kind of wrapped textures to them, um, and and working in a way that I think really kind of, as much as I can, embraces failure, unknown, and just the possibility of what the forms can do. It really, for me, the concepts all really come from the process of making and the possibilities and limitations that the materials kind of put in front of me. So some of these I'm just going to kind of go through I don't, just to kind of show you. I've got some process pieces, images that I want to show you as well. Here are some more drawings. I would also say that just practically, because there is something practical about being that we have to think about as being an artist. It's a lot of people love sculpture and many people kind of wish they could acquire some sculpture, but not always easy to do so financially or spatially. And so drawings are a great way for people to kind of connect with your work without necessarily making the commitment that a sculptural purchase might be. So here I just have some in process pieces that I want to show you uh, from the studio as they're kind of evolving. Some of these pieces I tend to, and again, this is kind of like what happens sometimes when you're a beginner. Uh, I tend to kind of push these pieces really kind of fast. And sometimes I have to check myself. I use a lot of supports to keep things from falling apart. For those of you who are, I use like a sculpture body, which has a decent amount of grog, which kind of helps me build some decent size pieces. And it's a commercially available clay. I don't make my own clay. But this piece in particular, I was thinking about the form kind of thinning out in space so that it would kind of move from a dimensional solid form to something that might be becoming kind of thin and ethereal in space. Thinking about the word sublimation, sublime, which is sublimation is something that goes from a solid straight to a gas, skipping over being a liquid. So thinking about how these forms might kind of dissolve into space. And some of them are kind of large and will not fit into the kiln. So this is also one of the benefits of painting as opposed to glazing the pieces. I'll make them and slice them apart, which is as terrifying as it sounds. And once the different parts are fired, I will epoxy them together and then kind of fill out the seams and kind of sculpt the seams so that as much as possible, is seamless, and then kind of paint the piece. And these pieces are painted, I would tell you, in many, many layers, and just to kind of build up a sense of depth to them. Here's some more drawings. Uh, and again, the drawings, and this drawing, as an example, is a good one to show, kind of next to this kind of piece over here. Again, the drawings are not blueprints, but I start to kind of make some drawings, and they kind of give me like kind of ideas of what the sculptures might look like. So here's a sculpture that actually never made it because it wound up on the floor, just too fast, and but that's just kind of the way it works sometimes. So I wanted to show you, I think coming up soon. Here's some of my latest pieces that I just wanted to show you. These are not in the show, but I start to experiment with coloration in the pieces. And as far as color is concerned, I wanted to have some type of conceptual framework for them. So I thought it would be interesting to have pieces that had kind of like a sulfuric quality, as if, again, they're kind of coming from the earth, something that was maybe kind of beautiful, but at the same time toxic. So I started to experiment with these pieces where I would spray on layers and layers of latex paint, and then kind of begin to isolate certain spots with kind of crusty yellows and different kinds of metallics. So to give you a sense of scale, this one here is probably about uh, around 4 feet to 4 feet tall, somewhere in that nature. Um, and so these are really, really fresh. These are pieces that I made, just kind of finished up at the end of 2024, and they were in an exhibition that I had at the University of Dallas. And these pieces are I'm experimenting with a different kind of titling system called adaptations, and giving them these kind of subtitles. So this one over here is kind of adaptation ossicones, and ossicones are the kind of the horns from a giraffe, which you can kind of see these little kind of horns coming out in the top. And yeah, just kind of playing with different kind of titling systems and multiple forms coming together. And that is it for my that's it for my slides. So I'd be happy to
Hey, are there any questions?
answer any questions or anything like that.
Any questions? Just one moment. We have a question in the back.
Thank you. Thank you for your great presentation. I was wondering, how do you see yourself moving forward after making these pieces? Are you going to try new materials? How do you want to develop this further?
Yeah, thank you. My next moves, I think I'm interested in continuing with the clay, but I'm interested in playing with groupings, installation strategies of these pieces, having some of them in conversation with each other, I'm interested in, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit, but having kind of addressing the environment that they came from. So thinking about different kind of forms or landscapes that they could be coming from. And, I've gotten pretty excited about this kind of, slight color shift. So I'm interested in playing with those possibilities as well.
Anyone else? Any other questions? I was wondering if you will be possibly introducing any new materials, or have you considered other materials within your work?
Yeah, I think that so actually I'm kind of interested in combining, potentially combining uh the kind of linear quality of some metals that can be manipulated in that way, with the clay as either as kind of interesting or strange support structures. Um, Maybe replacing some of these pedestals with different kinds of materials that might relate to the forms or the environment that they're in. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Arny. It's a really wonderful show, and appreciate the artist talk as well. There is a reception that is following this talk in the gallery or near the gallery. So we welcome you to go over and, have a snack and see the show if you haven't seen it yet, and I think that's it for today. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you again, Arny.
Thank you.